More and more outlets are closing down their comment sections. Now, when The Guardian does that, it's sorta understandable. They're consistently on the losing side of it, and they don't think too highly of the inherent value of having a diversity of opinions. But when decent outlets do it constantly, that is when it's a red flag. But it's not naming and shaming that we shall discuss in this episode, but rather the importance of comment sections as a whole. In general, not just for one outlet or for a particular kind of outlets. Comment sections are incredibly important for assessing and influencing the culture, which probably explains in part why the usual suspects don't like it. That's our episode today. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to another installment of Freedom Alternative Research and Analysis. Alright, this is a video I've been wanting to make for almost a year now. I got the idea in my head in February or March when I was following the United States primaries. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I got the idea from a comment section. Perhaps at least a third of the new things I learn every month could be traced back to a comment I read somewhere in a comment section that had an interesting link or an interesting train of thought that led me to think that that particular issue or argument deserves further investigation. In a way, it's somewhat cruel that I have to refer to those people as some comment in a comment section. Those are the forgotten avant-garde thinkers that no one has an obligation to credit them, though quite frankly it could prove to be a monumental task anyway. I mean, even if I were to remember the article, the name of the commenter, and the publication in which I read something, that's still no guarantee that I can still find that comment a year or two later on. And even if I could, more often than not, especially with unpopular ideas, I would end up crediting VX Truth 1920 or something like that. Anyway, in this video, we'll look at three aspects: data, comment policy, political value, and of course, practical politics. Alright, so for the purposes of this video, I tried to find several studies on comment sections, and quite surprisingly to me, there's very little relevant literature about the topic. Sure, there are a lot of opinions out there, but we all have those. What I was looking for is some data on attitudes about the comment sections in general. And I wasn't able to find that much, and conducting a full-scale case study all by myself would take too much, though I'll probably have to do that someday. Or maybe not. But until then, let's work with what we have. The first on the agenda is an article published by the American Press Institute in August last year titled, "As News Orgs Drop Comment Sections, Data Shows Users Don't Think They're That Important." Now the title is very misleading, probably because the API has a bias against comment sections, or at the very least a bias in favor of the publication used as a case study, which is the militant left-wing NPR trying to justify closing off its comment section. But nevertheless, the article does provide some data and some neat graphs that can give us an idea about attitudes regarding comments in users. So, let's read the most relevant part. Quote, "Our research on what leads users to trust and rely on certain news sources shows that only 1 in 3 Americans said it is very important that digital news sources allow people to comment on news. In focus groups, participants said that they found some values in those features, but other issues related to ads and mobile compatibility were more important than allowing comments. But for certain types of news stories, Americans tend to think that the ability to comment is more important. In particular, 50% of people said it was very important for a news organization to allow comments on crime and public safety stories. In comparison, just 23% of people said it was very important for news organizations to allow comments on local news stories." Now, they have these graphs here, and in them you can see that while it is true that only 30% of the people surveyed believe the comment sections are very important, there's also another chunk, almost as big, of 27%, who also believe that the existence of comment sections is somewhat important. So in other words, the headline could have very well be, "As news orgs drops comment sections, data shows that more than half of American users believe comment sections are still important." But then again, this is the post-truth era where even their own data isn't particularly of relevance. Also, these answers are ranked relative to other aspects, such as how fast the website loads on mobile platforms or how annoying their ads are. As such, it is reasonable to at least hypothesize that if these issues had been solved, a lot more thought would have been put into the feature of being able to provide feedback, and perhaps a lot more than 57% of the respondents would have said that having a comment section is at least somewhat important. In fact, the points that I made just now about this article are in part formed by the two comments that exist in API's comment section for this article, which should provide a window into why I find comment sections valuable. But anyway, we'll get to that. Meanwhile, let's take another look at another set of data from the Engaging News Project, a partisan left-wing academic source. We find a very detailed analysis based on the comments posted on the New York Times, the former newspaper. If you remember, the same set of comments was also used to train Google's bot to filter out abusive content, which was countered by shitlord's Operation Google. Anyway, the report focuses on how good New York Times' redesign was for comments and emphasizes the positive differences that it made. However, the more important aspects are buried slightly deeper in the report. Now, I'm not going to read the whole report. You can have a go at it yourselves. Links are in the low bar. But this aspect about the politics of comments is quite relevant to the point about their political value. So, page 11 from the PDF, quote, "The New York Times data allowed us to see what attributes of comments increase the number of recommendations a comment receives. We examined whether the number of words in a comment, as well as whether the comment contained political, uncivil, or profane words, predicted the number of recommendations from site visitors. We found that recommendations increased when comments included partisan and uncivil words. We examined the presence of partisan words, including references to the political left, such as Clinton, Biden, or the Dems, and references to the political right, such as Bush, Rand, or the Repubs. Incivility, as described earlier, meant that the comments used the words like bigot, liar, dumb, or hypocrite. Partisan comment in a comment affected the number of recommendations that a comment received. When a comment included at least one reference to the political right, the comment had 3.4 more recommendations than a comment that did not reference the political right. Inclusion of references to the political right, along with references to incivility, such as dumb and repubs or Bush and hypocrite, prompted a larger increase in number of recommendations. When a comment included words related to the political right as well as words related to incivility, that comment was likely to have 7 times more recommendations than a comment that included neither type of the word. So, what does that tell us? Well, first of all, it tells us that at least the researcher is left-wing biased, which is shocking to exactly nobody. And that the researcher's bias prevents us from learning a crucial aspect. What happens with comments that have an obvious right-wing bias? Nowhere could I find that information. But nevertheless, from this paragraph, we learn that the visitors who spend time reading the comments but not necessarily commenting themselves tend to lean politically somewhere between Obama and Stalin and tend to be very passionate about it so as to click recommend whenever they see a passionate partisan comment posted in the NY Times comment section. Alright, but what about comment policy? This report has something to say about that too, which is a good indicator for the second part of the video. So, page 10 of the report, quote, "We first examined how journalists make decisions about which comments to reject from appearing on the site altogether. As the chart below shows, length mattered. Journalists were less likely to reject comments that were longer than 29 words. The longest comments were approximately 8% less likely to be rejected compared to the shortest comments. Far more important than length for determining whether a comment was rejected, however, was the use of profanity such as BS, damn, or hell. When a comment included at least one word from our profanity dictionary, it was much more likely to be rejected by a moderator. A comment with profanity was approximately 36.2% more likely to be rejected from the comment section. So, this means that the Times doesn't outright reject comments just because they use profanity. If it's profanity directed at the right sort of people, then that's fine. Anyway, the conclusion of this particular paper is that comment sections are fundamentally useful, and this report is essentially a left-wing argument on why comment sections should exist. I suppose not very many leftists in the cathedral media read it, since comment sections are disappearing primarily on left-wing sources. But anyway, let's take a look at another study, and then we go to the next parts of the video, which will be shorter since we'll be using data to make arguments. So, also from the Engaging News project, they have a paper here with interviews with several dozens of professional journalists and their positions on comment sections. Now, the paper is largely poorly written with highlights on some quotes by their interviewees, yet the conclusion is surprisingly better written, and it also provides an admittedly limited insight into how journalists view this whole comment section business. So, I'll only read the conclusion, page 5 of the PDF, which you can download and read it yourselves. Again, links are in the low bar. Quote, "Our interviews suggest a shift towards journalists embracing commenting and seeing reading them and sometimes responding to them as a vital part of their jobs. Earlier studies have found that journalists had a more negative view of online comments. For example, a survey of 647 journalists at 36 news organizations found most did not read the comments. Similarly, interviews with journalists in 2 other studies reported a dim view of comments and little interaction between journalists and commenters. The journalists we interviewed viewed comments as a means to understand what their audience members are thinking, to improve their coverages with follow-up stories, and to engage with their readers. A few reported that engaging with readers was essential to driving traffic to their sites, so they saw responding to comments as necessary for their news organization's survival. However, our interviews also suggest that journalists have some ambivalence about this new task. Some embraced reading and responding to comments heartily, but others felt overwhelmed by how much time it took. Others saw responding to comments as outside of their journalistic duties, suggesting that they could not continue as objective watchdogs of the public trust if they engaged with the audience." This is glorious. So, we're not going to read any of your feedback because that would hinder our ability to be watchdogs of the public trust. Amazing. I mean, this type of attitude, in addition to be part of the explanation why Trump won, is the kind of attitude that in itself shows how unsure these glorified bloggers are. And it also shows that they know they're not firm in their beliefs and as such are afraid that they might change their mind if they engage with the audience. However, if we are to take this paper seriously, it would seem that this attitude is less and less prevalent as time goes on, and that journalists, or maybe I should say bloggers and content creators, young and old, start to embrace the comment sections. But if this is the case, then why are we seeing the opposite trend in way too many media venues? This could be either because this last paper we quoted from is wrong in its assessment, or because there's more than one factor in deciding to allow comments or not, and if yes, what comments stay and what comments are being deleted. So for this, let's slide into the second part, the comment policy. Alright, let's make these ones shorter so I'll leave more time for practical politics. So, Comment policies nowadays are more diverse than ever. They range from the Telegraph, which temporarily suspended all its comment sections, that was almost a year ago, going through the likes of CNN, who sometimes allow comments, sometimes they don't, and no one really knows which is which and when, or The Guardian, that has an explicit comment is free section, in which comment is not really free. I mean, just try explaining the negative effects of feminism and you'll see what I mean. And on the opposite end of the spectrum is Breitbart, which not only allows virtually unfettered comments on its platform, but also goes the extra mile and imports the Facebook comments that it gets on its articles and puts those on the site's comment section as well. Now, admittedly, Breitbart uses discourse rather than their own system, but they do host the comments on site nevertheless. In the past, it was so that comments were part of most platforms, and it was simply a matter of introducing a nickname, some BS email address, and then the comment itself, and all comments were hosted on site. Now, as much as I loathe those who don't maintain a comment section, there are non-political reasons for which those easygoing options are virtually extinct, and one of those reasons is the increased prevalence of spam. Now, another reason is the fact that some publications, regardless of their political leanings, simply cannot afford a free-for-all comment section, although more and more of them are learning that they actually can afford it. One example in this regard is the Daily Mail, which only closes the comments when it's an article with or about persons that cannot be legally named, such as a minor engaged in criminal activity or a victim of a sex crime, and so on and so forth. But otherwise, free for all, as long as you make an account, is the norm on the Daily Mail, which, by the way, making an account is not exactly easy, but it does drive out spam quite well. But other than these reasons, the thin skin is the only other reason for not having a comment section. And while there are thin-skinned right-wing publications as well, such as the National Review, which recently abolished its discuss and largely free, as in freedom, comment section, and opting for a Facebook plugin, the next day that was the moment when I decided enough is enough, and the next day I canceled my paid subscription to them. I mean, seriously, going on a tangent here, the worst thing you can do is to allow a comment section that requires a Twitter or a Facebook account, especially Facebook. Discuss is, as far as I'm concerned, a very good compromise. Yes, it allows website cross-linking, but it's anonymous enough and its cookies can be easily blocked with the right browser plugin installed. However, with Facebook, you're pretty much fucked. I mean, I can afford some leeway because I created over 50 accounts back in 2009 and I know how to use multiple accounts without their algorithm figuring out that it's the same person. But how many people do know how to do this? And of those, how many of them even bother to do it? Not very many, you can bet on that. The curbing of anonymity is of great concern for everyone, not just right-wingers. In fact, I will leave an article from Tech Dirt on the issue in the low bar. Now, Tech Dirt is a tech publication read almost exclusively by politically correct types. They are worried about this as well. But as I was saying, while there are thin-skinned right-wing publications, the overwhelming majority of the anti-comment sections rhetoric and the overwhelming majority of publications that refuse comments outright or police them so strictly that they might as well shut them down are on the political left. Particularly the political far left, such as The Guardian, which publishes regularly articles from nobodies that rally against the existence of comment sections. One example is this guy, Tariq Musa, who argues on The Guardian that comment sections are poison. He also argues on Big Think that necrophilia and incest are perfectly okay, and this is a professor of ethics, mind you. Incidentally, I am blocked on Twitter by him, even though I had never heard about him before a few days ago when I conducted the research for this video. Even so, his article is shredded to pieces by leftists in the Guardian comment section, which is glorious to watch, but it also shows that the fight for comment sections is not per se a left-right issue, but rather a plebs versus undeserving elitist fuckwits. And that's how we slide towards the third part, the political value of comment sections. Now, I know that there are many who genuinely believe that not everything is political, but they would be wrong. Almost everything is political, and I'll make a feel-good mythology on this topic, but until then, let me briefly explain. Virtually everything we do, say, and think is political. Leftist partisans understand that, which is why they're successful in subverting so many things. Comment sections, particularly those who allow a higher degree of anonymity, provide an almost unique insight into how diverse the political realm of opinions really is. Now, once you scale that up, such as an unfettered comment section that has 10,000 comments or more, and now you can actually start making remarkably accurate projections about certain future events, such as the result of elections, and more often than not, make a very realistic assessment about the trend of opinions. Now, one of the reasons we could predict so many things is precisely because we followed the comment sections. Now, publicly, especially on this channel, I was a lot more restrained than in private conversations, partly because this channel is not about me being right and rubbing it into people's faces, but rather about ideas. But others were a lot more bold. Just look up on YouTube Trump prediction election and filter for videos that are 2 months or older. You'll find plenty of videos of YouTubers, some channels a lot smaller than this one, and all of them regular Joes who made remarkably accurate predictions. Watch those and then read the comment section. What you'll see there is people arguing for their predictions based on comment sections of their own local newspapers and private convos they've had with union bosses or other relevant stakeholders. In other words, those little people were superior in predicting this to the mainstream polls precisely because they looked where nobody else looked, namely at what people say when they know nobody can tie their words with their name and face. And mind you, this goes way beyond Trump predictions. I was able to accurately predict François Fillon's victory in the primaries, and I stand by my prediction that he is the next president of France precisely because I looked where nobody was looking. Similarly, other commentators have predicted Brexit accurately or the results of the last German regional elections. Now, speaking of Germany, perhaps this is why the German state is cracking down on online comments so hard, because their internal predictions based on comment sections show what many of us already suspect, namely that the Alternative für Deutschland will rank much higher than the media would have us believe. And the more comments run unfettered, the more likely it is that ranking goes even higher. Because the most important political value of comment sections is that it disrupts mainstream narratives. One fine example is the Jackie story published by the Rolling Stones. And when the story came out and became viral, I do remember this, I was in the virtual newsroom with A Voice for Men, and we were discussing how to approach the story. We were already suspecting that the story was bollocks, at least in part, if not most likely in its entirety. In the end, we decided at the time that agitprop is the superior approach to editorializing over it, and I'm glad we went for that. Now, what agitprop meant? Well, ask the inconvenient questions in every comment section. And I guess this is where we go to the practical politics part. So anyway, we decided to take the agitprop approach, and then soon after that, a rather unknown journalist at the time named Richard Bradley wrote an excellent article on his blog about the spectacular inconsistencies of Jackie's story. So we used that, and not only us, but everyone in the wider non-feminist majority interested more in the truth and a lot less in the Marxist feminist narrative. Now, Bradley's link was plastered all over comment sections and sent to anyone willing and unwilling to take a look and consider the point of view. And it worked. Days later, another writer from Reason magazine took the time to look at the facts and penned the first semi-mainstream article calling the whole thing a giant hoax, and it all went downhill from there. Shitlords invaded the I Stand With Jackie hashtag, and by December 8, 2014, almost 3 weeks after the story had been initially published, the story only needed a final nail in the coffin, which was provided by Jonathan Taylor over at A Voice for Male Students. Now you can Google it yourselves and see that after December the 9th, the only relevant discussion was how to punish Jackie, the magazine, the journalist, and generally what to expect in a court of law. Now imagine there had been no comment sections. The whole support for building up pressure for the truth and against the feminist lies would have perhaps never have been built in the first place. At best, it would have been a lengthy, pedantic argument between the editors at Reason magazine and the editors at the Rolling Stones. Maybe. Though I wouldn't hold my breath on that either, since Reason is an insane place most of the time. Heck, they still keep the dogmatic feminist ideologue Cathy Young there, for crying out loud. Now, comment sections essentially disrupted everything for the received wisdom. No wonder feminists hate the comment sections the most. But anyway, this argument applies to any topic, not just sexual politics. For instance, fair discussions about cultural Marxism were very rare 7 or 8 years ago. I mean, it was Bill Whittle with his now famous The Narrative video, and was also the video with Bill Linz from the Accuracy in Academia, and that was pretty much it. Then shitlords came around, and by 2012 there was a pretty robust discussion on cultural Marxism going on. Now, in the current year, it's a term accurately used in parliaments around Europe and around the world. With the notable exception of The Guardian and the extreme fringes of the far left, nobody denies cultural Marxism anymore. Even mainstream leftists have started to slowly make amends on the issue, either by admitting outright that the approach is wrong, or by saying that it's well intended but some parts of it should be dropped, such as the urge to censor anything and everything. Either way, the comment sections did this. Year on end, for 1 or 2 lone comments on every article espousing cultural Marxist tropes, and the comments saying, just Google Frankfurt School, this madness is not an accident. This is what propped up the debate. Another example is, well, Donald Trump himself. There is a running joke that Trump is what happens when a comment section runs for president. And while the joke is meant to disparage Trump, I think it's rather a compliment and an admission to the power of comment sections. I mean, imagine this. 2 years ago, you could only see a phrase such as, we should build a wall, even better, and have the Mexicans pay for it, in a comment section. Now, well, now it's kind of the official policy. The New York Times just printed it again. And I could go on quite a lot with these kinds of examples. The point is that comment sections serve a very useful political purpose and are one relevant tool in practical politics projects. Now, those who disagree with this view are quick to point out that only 1% of the readers of a publication actually comment on a story, which is somewhat true, though I would add that it does depend on the publication. On Breitbart, it's probably a lot more than 1%, whilst on the New York Times, it's definitely a lot less than 1%. But that doesn't matter. It's not who writes the comments that matter, but those who read the comments. You know, back in the days when letters to the editors were a thing, the rule of thumb in editorial rooms was that one angry letter to the editor represented 100 angry readers. So 10 or 15 letters was enough to scare the crap out of an editor. Somewhat similar are the things with comment sections. One comment can mean up to 10,000 readers, and especially when upvoting is easy. And this can be demonstrated fairly easy. When you look at big publications and you see 3,000 comments, but most of them with 5,000 upvotes or more, dismissing the comments as petty trolling is a mistake. Now, you're free to do so, as liberals usually do, but do so at your own peril. An example of this is an article by Cesar Vargas, a very left-wing individual who published an article on the Huffington Post explaining why he no longer supports Hillary Clinton. Just look at the comments. 1,430 likes for the first one, 670 for the second one, over 500 for the sixth one. In fact, no thread opening comment on the first page has fewer than 80 likes, and of the first page, only one comment is pro-Hillary. And this is the Huffington Post, and an article that wasn't circulated amongst rightists that much. Also, you can see that these are regular people commenting, not political hacks or partisan shills. These are the kinds of comment sections that show a very, very realistic insight. I actually read them all. Most of these people don't even know what a pollster looks like, don't have a landline, and many of them never had, and a significant minority of them never voted until November. Virtually all of them ended up voting for Trump, and likely most of those who liked their comments. All right, one more thing and then we can wrap this very long one up. The comment sections held on site do matter. It's easy to say, well, go on our Facebook page and comment there like the Daily Beast does, but that's hardly workable with a publication that puts 20 new items on its page every day. Ironically, that is the practice that attracts mostly political hacks and rarely attracts regular people. If anything, Facebook threads on the publisher's page instead of an actual page of the article are more skewed than the traditional ones. Yes, comments can turn nasty. Yes, there's trolling. Yes, there's spam. And yes, there is intentional obscenities from time to time. But by and large, a relatively free comment section is much better than no comment section. Even if it's a Facebook plugin that is being used. Now, granted, that makes it difficult for the majority of people who are not on Facebook, but at least they're there and the regular Joe can read the comments. And with that, this concludes another long episode of Research and Analysis. So now you tell me, in my remarkably free comment section, what do you guys think about all of this? Am I off the mark with my praising of the comment sections? And if so, where do you think I'm wrong? Conversely, where do you think what do you think it should be done to dissuade publishers from dropping the comment sections altogether? Is there something that can be done? I haven't had time to think about that. But seriously, throw it all in the comments below. Let's chat on this because I think it's very, very important. And with all of that being said, thank you for watching. Thank you for your continuous and generous support. And I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.